I was telling you how a couple days ago I was on Instagram and I came across this post and it said, if you're silent about Palestine and your mother tongue is Arabic, you may as well cut it off.
It's such a graphic and like at least in my mind or my body, it feels so graphic and violent.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is the opposite of the
It
message you're trying to say.
Yeah. We've talked about we had an episode called Social Media, Social Justice, and we've talked a lot about this like newfound hashtag activism, how people use Instagram to like really propel a movement or tag on to a movement.
Yeah.
And
Or gain awareness about a movement.
yep, exactly. Like Instagram has just become a huge tool in terms of like online activism. But it it's it's very overwhelming, especially if your main point of engagement is actually not on Instagram like mine is. And so when we talk about people being silent, what are we defining as silent? Is it that because they're not posting on Instagram? Is that what it means to be silent? Or is it that, you know, that do you know what I mean? Like I really
Yeah.
struggle with it.
I think, while Instagram is so good at so many things, like it's great at raising awareness about things or like being able to reach a lot of people very quickly. Like it is very good at disseminating information, but the drawback of that is it's constant dissemination of information and you just feel like so overwhelmed. I feel like
Mm.
all the time being online and constantly looking at different things and um like in our previous episode, social media, social justice, we talked a lot about like performative social justice activism, like performative activism, where you like will put up a post and then you'll move on. And I feel like you obviously want to like hold those people accountable. And like this is something that we kind of have talked about just generally. It's like where people will post something like very serious and like very important that's happening in the world right now. And then their next slide will be like, are you single? Let's do a poll. Or like just like something random or like a meme or whatever. And I think there's like two sides to it. I think like one side is when you do something like that, I know that you're feeling this pressure of having to perform this activism or like having to post because you don't want to be on the flip side of it. But then in doing that, like it just makes your post or your whatever so disingenuous.
Yeah.
It's like you posted this just to post it. And then like what value are you adding to this conversation, to this whatever?
That's my biggest thing. It's like I find that I've been very like self-critical of why I haven't been sharing anything on social media. There's a lot going on in the world. You have what's happening in Palestine, you have what's happening in India, you have what's happening in Colombia, you have what's happening in Afghanistan, and all of this is circulating online all at the same time. And on top of dealing with COVID fatigue, you're also trying to process everything that you're seeing. So like I was telling Trini as an Arab who grew up in the Middle East, the occupation of Palestine is not something that's new to me.
Yeah.
But this is still very overstimulating, and so it's hard for me to put into words, you know, what my perspective is. Not that people need to know what my perspective is, not that I need to like make a stance on where I stand. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it it's exactly what you said about not adding value. I feel
Yeah.
like there are voices and people who are using their platform to truly add value to the conversation. And I just feel like if you don't have anything of value to add, but you're just resharing for the sake of it, what is the intent? What are you
Yeah.
trying to do?
No, I totally agree. I think I think you're right. It's like very overstimulating, but it also actually, I feel like, doesn't give you any space to properly engage with what you're posting or what you're even seeing. Like, I feel like it's this
Yeah.
bombarding, whatever, of
Yeah.
like information, of facts. And if you're not somebody who might seek out that information on your own and you potentially rely on social media to tell you, excuse me, what's happening and what's going on, like it's very overwhelming. But at the same time, I feel like it does two things. It's one, very fatalistic. Every post about what is happening in any of the parts of the world that you named, it's very, very fatalistic. And I understand that that is to impart the gravity of the situation through a very small like media type.
Yeah.
But what it does actually is it desensitizes you to it. I feel like you
Yes.
just you see all of this stuff that's coming in, and you're so like constantly being like, it's so in your face all the time, and as it should be, but it's so in your face in a potentially like inconsequential way via like a post or like a quick story or whatever, that you actually like disengage from
Disengage.
it and you become desensitized, and you're just scrolling through Instagram seeing like 50 stories or 50 posts of the exact same thing over and over again, that it's not even registering. And so it's not to say that you shouldn't post. It's just like, I feel like there's burnout of consumption and burnout of production. And it's like, there's way too much to consume, but then there's also way too much to put out. And like, you don't have to constantly be reposting or putting out. Like, you can just take a moment to engage in a way that's like actually meaningful and adds value.
Yeah. I completely agree. We follow this account called Intersectional Environmentalists, and they have been, I really love their approach to it.
Mhm,
They
mhm.
have really opened the space for marginalized communities
Yeah.
to speak about their experience.
Mhm.
And it's very, I think, what's really challenging about the Palestinian the occupation of Palestine in general is that it comes with, I'm like very carefully choosing my words. It comes with a very long history
Mhm.
um that is still unresolved.
Mhm.
And you can see that in terms of like the it people are trying to bring up the like there are two sides to this argument. You know, it's not like they're fighting it's not like you know, one country is trying to rebel against a corrupt government. It's like you have people feeling like they're two sides of the coin. If
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
do.
so for every post that's making space for these communities, someone else is coming up and saying, you know, you're not considering everything, or you're not taking into account my perspective. And
Mhm.
so it's a lot of dialogue and a lot of content, to your point, for people to consume and people to fully grasp.
No, totally. I think too, it's like, I think when people post about things that are happening in the world that they either care about or relate to, it's very difficult because post, no post, not even one that you might create yourself, is going to be all encompassing of your experience, of how you feel, of your emotions towards something, because you just, in the like Instagram is literally made to consume information very quickly. It's not like this big platform to like write about all of your feelings and every thought that you've had and explore that. Like, I mean, people obviously use it that way, and that's fine, but like in terms of disseminating information, it's like super quick. It's like, give me the Coles notes, like I like need the facts and I'm like moving on. And I feel like people people get really upset about, you know, posts not being encompassing how they feel or their experience or whatever, but you can't possibly say everything in this one post or this one story, like,
Yeah.
unless you truly go so far deep into like penning every one of your thoughts, in which case no one is even going to take the time to like actually read that post or those stories, because that's not what Instagram is for. And like that's potential, like that therein lies the problem, but you know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
it's just really difficult, because I think that people get mad and people get really angry because you're not, like, they don't see themselves perfectly reflected. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's because your experience is not encompassing of everybody's experience. But that's why, like, I think that like the burnout of consumption is equally as bad as the burnout of output. But like the reason that it's so bad is because I think when you're consuming so much, like you're constantly looking to consume in a way where you feel validated, where you feel seen, where you're like learning. And then when you don't find that, it's like obviously very frustrating.
Yeah.
But that's why like it just doesn't make sense to continue to like repost and reshare and whatever without adding any value
Yeah.
to what's actually happening. But I feel like that is just sort of what ends up happening with social media when things become as big as they do. Um, as this has.
Yeah, 100%. I was telling you how even back in August of last year when everything was happening with Lebanon and even before that, those were the rare times where I was posting on social media about something
Yeah.
that that was nothing relating to like what I would normally post.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the validation that I was looking for. It's not that
Yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
get people reaching out to me and, engaging with me, but at the end of the
Mhm.
day, I didn't feel I just whatever I was looking for
Yeah.
from posting it, I didn't get. And so even thinking about like who is who is my audience? Like who am I
Yeah.
posting? Like what am I doing? Who am I posting this for?
Yeah.
What is the purpose? What's the intent? Trini always makes fun of me because anytime we plan anything for our podcast, I'm always like, what's the intent? Like, what's the plan? And I say that to myself, especially with like, I think using your platform or how you use your platform is a huge responsibility. And you really teeter on a very small or thin line. And that's like this perfect example of this account that we both follow who literally posted like Free Palestine. And then the very next slide or story was, let's do a poll. Are you single?
It just, yeah, like it takes away, it takes away. But what I was actually going to say, like when you were talking about how you didn't get the validation that you needed or that you were looking for when you posted what you were posting,
Mhm.
um, I feel like also sometimes it's really difficult to talk about your own personal things. Like it almost is harder to put into words how you personally feel about something,
Right.
which is why people start like resharing and reposting. But I think that's when like the message just gets lost in the sea of reposts, because it loses meaning after a while,
Yeah.
because it's just like so constant.
I think also the fact that we have been inside this whole time because of the pandemic and have had
Yeah.
to turn to an online world, it feels like there's nowhere for us to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's really no choice.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's just like I think with everything that's been happening, it's it's not a bad thing, that people are becoming more engaged or are learning or are taking the time to read whatever post that might be. And I think like that is a really good side of it. But I personally have just, I want to learn, and I already do know about, just things that are happening, and like you want to stay informed. I think that's what I was trying to say. But it's really difficult for me because you obviously it's a privilege to say you want to like disconnect for a little bit or you want to connect back. Like I understand that. But you cannot go on any social media without seeing this. And I just wonder I wonder to what extent this is actually helping.
Yeah.
Like I think if you're just reposting, like people will get burnout of reposting, people get burnout of constantly consuming, but like what change is that making? And I think that's like that kind of like equilibrium between when posting or reposting something,
Mhm.
the benefit of it drops off.
I definitely think there is, like, I think that's what makes it so hard is that there are very clear pros to how fast social media works and how fast the message gets spread. Like, if we think about the BLM movement, over the
Yeah.
summer, I don't think you would have had as big of a turnout in,
Yeah.
the rallies as you did if
If
it
it
were
were
not for
not.
social media. And we're actually seeing the same now with the, rallies in support of Palestine, like,
Yeah.
they're everywhere around the world, so it's an incredible way to spread information and gain attention, but to your point, the fall off is quick, and even today, like, I think it was just earlier this week where it all started to pick up, and today it's really slowing down
It's
on my
starting to die
feed.
down. But that's exactly what I mean, right? Like people get so into it and like will repost everything and like will constantly like be, talking about it. But then it passes and it's like, well, like the what is happening in Palestine right now didn't pass. The coronavirus pandemic in parts of the world that it's ravaging didn't pass. But like social media as a fad, it passed. And we're on to like the next thing. And it's partially because people just post this stuff and they get so desensitized to it. But I think that's where like people get so caught up in like posting and doing all that that they don't take meaningful, sustainable, like actionable change or like, make any sort of whatever, like any sort of change, any sort of anything that might actually be supporting these causes. And I think that's what makes it so difficult. And I also think that, with social media, people really put the responsibility on other people to teach them. Like they don't necessarily go out and seek information. They'll be like, oh, well, can you like, they'll literally put up, I saw someone do this where they were like, I want to learn more about what's happening in Palestine. Drop a link here. And so it was like a little like question box or whatever, and you could like input information. And I'm like, you could just do a Google search and many things would come up that you could learn from. But I think people become really complacent and they become really lazy, and then it spreads misinformation, it spreads false information. And like that's not sustained or sustainable change. Like you didn't do anything like, you know what I mean? Like you didn't learn anything from this where you're like, oh, I'm going to take this and do something beneficial. You were just lazy about how you consumed media to begin with.
It is a very lazy way to engage. It's like you wanna engage, but you don't wanna do the work in finding out what's going on.
Yeah,
Like, I think we just need to I think we need to give people. I am so conflicted with this, like,
I know.
every
No, I
time I
know.
go to say how I feel, I give myself, like, a counter argument on it. Like, I was
Yeah.
gonna say that we need to give people this space to digest and consume this information, but of course, like, time really is of the essence. But then at the same time, it's like, well, what do you need from me? Like, what is
Yeah. No, I know. It's like
what
no
is
one is
needed from
looking
me?
for me or whatever, like a personal thing to like make a stance. But then at the same time, it's like, well, that's where change happens. If you as a person are willing to like take
Grassroots.
this, yeah, the power of the people. Like
Yeah.
if you as a person are able to or are willing to like take a stand and say something or talk about it or bring awareness. And yeah, no, like I think about that a lot because I think like I'm someone who really tries to, or I think about holding, people who are in positions of power, like whatever that might mean, whether that's like literally in terms of government or whether that's in terms just of like influencers on Instagram, really holding them accountable and like being like, what are you posting during this time? Like, how are you using your platform for good or for change? And I think I have to remember that not everyone is necessarily trying to use their platform for good. Like people are truly just trying to run their platform to make money or to, make a business or to have a business, like, and their focus is on different things. And that's fine. It's just obviously very frustrating when those are the people who, when they share or they post or they make a statement, for lack of a better word, like that's where they're really able to like call on the power of the people, like the power of the mass, like, you know, to like make a change. But I always have to remind myself that like not everybody cares to use their platform like that. And I guess that's okay, but it's just very tone deaf. Like, for example, I've seen a lot of people post about, you know, what's happening in India with the coronavirus pandemic, and like how bad it's become. And they will post about different people needing, you know, different medical supplies, whether it's oxygen, whether it's a hospital bed, whether it's certain medication. And so they'll post about it. Um, and they'll reshare other people's information. And then the next post will be like something so frivolous, like them on vacation,
Yeah.
literally them on vacation. And you're like, I guess you can do both, but doesn't it just take away from the importance of what you posted the first time? Like, I don't know. And then there's also people who don't say anything at all, and they're like out on vacation and they're doing whatever with whoever. And you're like, I don't know. I have a really hard time with this.
Yeah.
I like really struggle with being like, not everybody has to care about everything, but at the same time being like, but isn't it a little selfish to not care at all about anything that's happening because you're just living your life? And it's kind of like what you said. Every time I have a thought about something, I have a counter thought to it where it's like, not everybody has to care, but then it's like, but they kind of do, because like you are like a global citizen. Like you can't just like sit in your little bubble of privilege and not think about what other people have to say. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, well then, like, I don't know. It's really difficult. And it's like something that I struggle with a lot, like the idea of holding people accountable.
But like I think you and I spoke about this too. I logged out of my personal Instagram today to take a step back. Like I really feel like I needed to take a step back, and I know it's a privilege to do that and not everybody
Yeah.
can step away, but you also need to be in a good mental state in order to fully engage and digest the content you're consuming.
Yeah.
So I took a break and I was going on our YQuim account, and I realized that there was almost nothing about what was happening in Palestine. There was almost nothing that was happening on like like the global scale period. And so it really matters how you diversify your feed and who you follow. And
Yeah.
these people that are posting like vacation photos probably
People
need
who
to diversify their feed.
people who are posting vacation photos like it is nobody's business, and like are out and like are on vacation and like, you know, whatever. I'm like, it's not as though you have to suffer because the world is suffering.
Yeah.
I get that, but it is a little insensitive. And it's also like, are you in touch with one thing that's happening in the world? Like, it's very strange to me when people just post with like no care and like no understanding. And oftentimes it is like white influencers in the
Yeah.
US or in Europe, but mostly in the US, that are just like, I'm going to LA. I'm like going to California for the weekend. I'm going to this retreat in California. I'm doing whatever. And you're like, there's a
But
pandemic.
first of all, yeah, seriously. But Shereen, like that's we didn't grow up here. Like we did, yes, but like we've seen the rest of the world. And like we know I was gonna say like we know global affairs, but like that doesn't make any
We
sense.
know global
We
affairs.
know global affairs, but we've had exposure to the rest of the world and how it works. And we've seen it, we've experienced it. And so we
Yeah.
come with a perspective that is a lot more connected to
Yeah.
what we're seeing online.
Yeah.
Whereas like I'm totally with you. It's very frustrating to see these things, but I've also learned that I need to lower my expectations because
Yes.
I can't expect people to understand the urgency of this if they're A, not open to understanding, or B, they just they've just grown up their whole lives here and they don't know anything different, you
And they
know?
don't make an effort to know anything different.
Yeah, exactly. Like, energy is an investment. And so wherever you put it, you want to make sure you're going to get the most out of it. And like these people who like this account that was like, let's do polls after I posted about this like horrific thing that's happening.
Yeah.
I love her content otherwise, but I think in a moment like that, instead of like immediately reacting, I was like, I'm just gonna turn my phone off because
Yeah.
I can't engage with this.
Well, that also is what leads to burnout. It's like the constant like expectations that you place on these like influencers or whoever it is on Instagram, and then like kind of feeling that like anger, and you're kind of like, this is really frustrating. Obviously, I'm not gonna like start fighting with them. I'm not gonna like comment and be like, you posted about Palestine and then you said, are you single? Like, this is like, you're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
But it's just, it is like frustrating because you're like, you have a platform and you could do so much good with it and then you don't. And it's like something that I'm really learning, that like everybody's mission is not to do something good. Like, not that they're actively trying to do something bad, but like
Mhm.
their focus is just something else.
Yeah.
But another sort of like theme that I've been seeing for a long time is the idea that like if you care about one thing, you have to care about everything. Um, and I think that sort of ideology also specifically on social media has really led to like just feeling so overwhelmed and constantly having to stay on top of everything and like overload of like stimulation, because I do think like it's not possible to want equality or equity in one thing and then not want it in another. So for example, it's not possible to be a feminist excuse me, it's not possible to be a feminist but then not support the Black Lives Matter movement, or it's not possible to support the Black Lives Matter movement but then not be an LGBTQIA2 plus ally. It's not, you can't really fully support one without supporting the other because they
Mhm.
are so interconnected. But I think the idea that like just because you care about one thing doesn't mean that you don't care about other things, but it doesn't mean that you have to fight with the same level of fight for every single thing. So for example, like I feel like a lot of times people are like, oh, well, people are talking about, I don't know, like people are talking about Palestine, but they're not talking about India, or like they're talking about
Mhm.
India, but they're not talking about Afghanistan. They're talking about this, but they're not talking about that. And it's like, you don't have to talk about every single thing. Like you just don't. You don't have to talk about every single thing. Like, and it's true in that the like systems of power and oppression that uphold what's happening in Palestine are certainly the reason why, India is in the COVID situation that it's in, is the reason why Trump was president. Like you can draw all of those conclusions,
Mhm.
which is why when you care about one thing, it doesn't mean you don't care about something else, but you might just be focusing your energy and your activism into one
Right.
thing to specifically avoid burnout and then make a positive change in a dimension if you can't do with them in every dimension.
100%. It's intersectional.
Absolutely. It is. But it's just it's very hard, and I think like people really get caught up in that trap on Instagram and on social media where they're like, you posted about this but you didn't post about this. Like, I
Yeah,
saw you post about this
policing.
but you were silent about this. It's like, yeah, okay, I was taking meaningful action offline. Like,
100%. And that's not to say that I'm not continuing to take meaningful action offline. Like
yeah.
it really goes back to this like this thing about what I said in the beginning of the episode, which was if you're silent about Palestine and your mother tongue is Arabic, you may as well cut it off. I was shook. I what is like
What's the
what
point?
is your takeaway? Like why are
Yeah.
you this I really don't know how to put it into words, but I hope that that in itself, it speaks for itself, because like, you shouldn't be pressuring people to post. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's
For
the
the sake
like
of it.
exactly. Like I feel like posting is great in raising awareness, but then what is that really doing for the cause? Raising awareness is great. People need to know about this so that they can sort of can come together and make
Together.
change and help and do all the things that they need to do. But that's not necessarily where the change happens. You know, those things that were like one share equals $1. It's like, no, it doesn't. Like one share does not equal $1. And frankly, those places that you're trying to help, the people you're trying to help need money and resources. And like sharing this post is not going to do that. So if you're not, and also like if you're not, what I was going to say is if you're not sharing, it doesn't mean you're not helping. And what does staying silent mean? Like you're staying silent on social media, you're staying silent
Yeah,
with your family.
exactly.
Like what does staying silent mean? What if you're not in a position where you can speak out about injustice? You know, like the idea in itself of speaking out about injustice is a privilege because we live in a place where we are not going to be killed for doing that. So it like I feel like that's such a intense thing to say because it's like, well, what does it mean to stay silent, and,
Yeah.
and under what condition or pretext or whatever are you even doing that?
Also knowing that, like, the systems of power, wherever you are, won't you won't fall on their radar.
Yeah, exactly. You won't be killed. Like there's millions of places in the world where you are not allowed to speak out about the government because you or whoever is in power, whether it's a government, dictatorship, whatever, because you will be killed because your computer is being monitored, because your social medias are being monitored.
100%.
And I think that is, you know, a very real and a very scary thing as well that people don't take into consideration.
No. They don't know global affairs like
They
us.
don't know global affairs like we do. I'm dead. We don't know global affairs
We don't.
like we
We
do.
don't. I don't know social media affairs, for God's sake.
I want to. But the other thing I was going to say too is I feel like, whenever I or we or even on social media talk about everything that's happening in terms of like global crises and like global social injustices, I get very nervous. Not nervous, but I always am thinking about how we're portraying, not we, you and me, we like globally, are
Yeah,
portraying the West versus the East. Like the way we talk about the West versus the way we talk about the East. And like when we talk about, say, Palestine or India or Afghanistan or Colombia, like we talk about these places as the other and as being poor countries or not having equality in those countries or not having you know democracy in those countries or not basically not upholding whatever we think is what society should uphold in terms of a Western society.
yeah,
And so that's why there's all these wars over there. That's why the COVID crisis is so bad over there. That's why the people, like their population is being killed, whatever the reason might be, or their government isn't listening
yeah,
to them, or is a corrupt government or whatever. And I think that like the portrayal of the East as that constantly is a very curated image that the media has curated to portray and to continue to other the East versus the West, to as in like look at how well the West is doing, look at this idea, this American dream, that the like you know this shiny dream that we have because we're so like developed and sophisticated and smart, and the East are just like a bunch of like idiots and just like there's war and there's this and there's that. And like so even when they share stuff online or talk about injustices happening in the East, like I'm always very nervous because I feel like while the raising awareness and all that is great, it does not reciprocate, but like reinforce an idea or an image of what the East looks like to somebody who doesn't know
Mhm.
what it really looks like or why it looks the way it does. And it's because of the West.
100%. I had this exact conversation with my dad because I, as you know, have been reading Obama's book and I've been loving it. But there are certain points in it where we've really been questioning. And it's this idea exactly about how like the West is the model for everything. Democracy, government, just society, day-to-day life. And we
Mhm.
force other countries to do the same. But what makes you think that that would work there, that we're looking to do the same thing there? That's not to say that like
But what makes you think it's even working in the West? Because it's
it's
clearly
not.
not. It's
No,
clearly not.
you're right. That's not to say too that like, okay, that we think authoritarianism is good,
No.
or like the practices that, were happening outside of in countries outside of the West were necessarily ones that needed to be kept. It's just that who are you what makes who are you to determine how the rest of the world should function?
Yeah.
There's
Well, it's
109 over 190 countries in this world.
yeah, colonialism. It's colonialism, literally. And I feel like people, we were kind of having this talk yesterday, which kind of deviates from potentially what this episode is about, but the idea where the West colonized so many parts of the East and have kind of, I don't want to say washed their hands, but have like spun this narrative that like they colonized any, it was either for the better or like, oh, like our bad, like we made a mistake, but like we're just here now and it's like completely separate.
Oh my god.
But the East, first of all, colonization has become such an ingrained part of their identity that it's not like a before and after.
Yeah.
It's very much a duration. It's like how we continue to function. And this idea that the West has portrayed of like, oh, but look at how bad the East is now after us colonizing them and us leaving. Sorry, I don't know why my voice keeps breaking.
No
Getting
problem.
so freaking emotional. No, I'm not. I don't know why it keeps breaking. This like idea that they've built where it's like, oh, but like look, like, they have no democracy, like they have no money, like they don't have any idea of what it means to be a functioning society after we left. And we left, like we washed our hands, like we're not doing anything anymore. And it's not true. Like it's like simply not true. First of all, because colonization remains a part of their identity and how their economy continues to work, how their people continue to live. But also because colonization may not be as literal as like colonizing land anymore, but it still functions in like very real ways in terms of global affairs.
Global affairs.
Ask about global affairs. And then it's really hard because those countries that have been colonized, they that's like kind of their point of reference. And so then they continue to do it to other countries. And it all goes back to global affairs and colonialism. But like truly, that is what it goes back to.
No, it does. It's so funny because everything you're saying, not haha funny, obviously, but
Mhm,
like
mhm.
it's just very interesting that everything you're saying is exactly what I've been talking to with my family about this. And like
Mhm.
with the US specifically,
Yeah.
they have had their hand in the Middle East for a very, very long time. And so it's very convenient that now they're like, oh, well,
Like, can you believe?
can
It's
you
like,
just
yeah, I can
nothing we
believe.
can do? Nothing we can do. On to the next thing. Like, it's very convenient for them to
Yeah.
now step away and be like, there's really nothing we can do.
Yeah.
We support like general policies that have never worked. So you're so right. Like, and that's the thing. Like, you wouldn't you wouldn't get this by just resharing something on Instagram.
No, and also you're sharing one part of this entire picture. You're sharing something that doesn't add any value, and you're sharing something that's potentially false or like
Yeah.
misleading to what's actually happening
But
or
here's
why it's happening.
but it's like again, like this is like where I almost feel like we're just going in like circles, and
Mhm.
anyone listening is also going in circles with us. But it, what are the same way that we asked people like what do you want from me when you're posting something, like what do you want me to do? I'm asking myself the same question. Like what do I want from people? Like what am I looking for them to do? Like I feel like I'm overwhelmed. I'm really overwhelmed, and
Yeah.
you can hear it in the way that I'm like struggling to put thoughts together. You can hear it in the way that I'm like going back and forth with myself. It's just like I think that people need to take it more upon themselves to do the research and engage offline. Like I think they need to balance engagement offline and online, number
Yeah.
one. And number two, I think that like people need to be mindful of the content that they post,
Yeah.
because like recognize that, this is a lot, and how am I contributing to the conversation? Just because you're not directly contributing to the conversation, like you and I, are going back and forth, understand that like what's the message? What are you putting out there? Like what are you looking for?
Yeah. What are you looking for and what are you looking to add? Like, is
Yeah.
it just about raising awareness? Okay. Like, share something that is most consistent with that or like that best portrays what you're trying to say, but don't just repost a bunch of stuff because you're like, well, I don't know, I'm just going to repost a bunch of shit. Like, I think it's important to be intentional with even with what you repost.
Yeah,
um and then I think too, like, I think it's really difficult because people look for a lot out of social media.
they
People
do.
look for information. People look to feel validated. People look for a community. People look to share their voice. People look to work through their emotions. People look to learn. People look to for so many different things. And I just feel like social media as a platform is unequipped and unequipped and unable to provide all of those things. And we're like setting it up for failure. I mean, like we're like, it is a failure in and of itself because of, all of the things that it does that are not good, but like we're not even giving it a chance to succeed
Yep.
because it's not set up to do those things. And it becomes really difficult when there are global tragedies and global affairs such as these. And you're looking for so much out of a platform that's really meant to like share a picture, and it's just not able to keep up with like what it's turning into. And then I think it just causes a lot of like distress and burnout and anxiety because you just it's not giving you what you want, but at the same time you're trying so desperately to try to make it work.